Firstly, I must obviously thank FIT Europe and PEEMPIP for inviting me to speak at this conference. The subject matter, as you can see, outsourcing from confrontation to influencing outcomes, is actually quite a big one. And if I went into too much detail, we would be here for many hours, and you'd wish you'd brought a sleeping bag. Actually, you might wish that anyway in 20 minutes, I don't know. So I'll have to assume a certain level of previous knowledge. You all know that we've got trouble in the UK, don't you? Yes, we have. Now, the deadline for transposition of the directive in question was the 27th of October last year. Yet on the 7th of November, which was, 11 days later, only 8 member states had communicated their national execution measures, despite benefiting from 3 years rather than the usual 2 for transposition. Now, there is a very compelling volume of evidence that not only is the United Kingdom not compliant with the directive in either letter or spirit, but that this failure is deliberately camouflaged. This is explained by the Ministry of Justice's public insistence that their failures to supply and manage the contract when the opposite is true, and many hundreds of failures to supply and manage the contract have been documented. Not once has the contractor ever achieved, let alone exceeded, supply targets. At the same time, complaints have spiraled to many, many thousands. Now we have the situation where directors of the contractor are summoned to court by judges regularly to explain this failure. Many judges have made public statements in court which demonstrate the depth of the contractor's failure. Let me give you an example. On the 28th of July, I'll pick a fairly recent one. We have examples every week, but this is quite a nice one for reasons that you'll see in a moment. On the 28th of July, an article was published by the Law Society Gazette. Now, the Law Society Gazette is the foremost legal news publication in the UK. This is what they said. Take away TERP. That's my headline, by the way. The headline says, "Defence told to trawl Chinatown for an interpreter." And the article goes on to say this: a Crown Court judge, asked a defence barrister to trawl the Chinese restaurants to find an interpreter after the company contracted to provide translators failed to do so on 2 occasions. Take away TERP, you see. Similarly, Judge Munby, head of the Family Division at the Royal Courts of Justice in London, branded arrangements for providing court interpreters unacceptable after he was forced to abandon a final adoption hearing as no one attended to interpret for Slovak-speaking parents. He said, "The contractual arrangements between the contractor and the interpreters do not give them the ability to require that any particular interpreter accepts any particular assignment, or even to honour any engagement which the interpreter has accepted." Now, let's examine that for a moment. If you're going to go to work at the Royal Courts of Justice and earn £20, what's 25, 26 euros, which doesn't even cover your train fare, and then you get a request to go on a separate job which will earn you £200, what are you going to do? That's why interpreters don't turn up at Crown Courts and Magistrates' Courts and police stations in the UK. The Law Society went on to say, the third point was the revelation that on the day of the hearing, Capita, the agency in question, had only 29 suitably qualified Slovak interpreters on its books for court hearings that day, and only 13 within a 100-mile radius of the Royal Courts of Justice. The number was insufficient to enable the company to provide 39 interpreters requested by courts on that date, from which you could correctly infer professional interpreters don't want to work for capita. The UK Ministry of Justice is adamant that the court system is compliant with the directive. On the 9th of July 2013, Lord McNally, then the Justice Minister in the House of Lords, stated this: "The government will take the steps necessary to ensure that the UK is compliant with the EU directive in good time for its implementation date." And then he went on, "I don't think we're in danger of non-compliance." Now, it's not possible to ask him how he reconciles such statements with the evidence we've already seen, since he resigned on the 18th of December. There's a pattern of ministers in the Ministry of Justice getting moved along after a short period of time. You barely know their name before they've gone, often sinking into obscurity because they get sacked because they're useless. Do you have that trouble in Greece or in other countries? Ministers getting sacked. I don't even bother wanting to talk to a minister anymore. Why? Because I go and see him tomorrow. Next week, he's fired. So what's the point? I'm not going to waste my time. We are on our third minister. His name is Shaileshvara. That's all I know about him. The National Audit Office has so far prepared 2 reports on this framework agreement, and each has been highly critical. Both were commissioned by the powerful Parliamentary Committee for Public Accounts, sometimes known as PAC, Public Accounts Committee for short. During one hearing, Margaret Hodge, chairman of the committee, who I've actually got to know quite well, interestingly enough, she's a charming lady, she has her faults, but, you know, so do we all. She says, "Oh, hello, Geoffrey, call me Margaret." Oh, she's lovely. She's only about that tall. During one hearing, Margaret observed that the MOJ was an unintelligent customer. Now, I don't know if you realise what that means. Unintelligent means thick. Unintelligent. You, Ministry of Justice, are institutionally thick. Imagine. Goes back to what you were saying a moment ago. These people are stupid, and they do need to be told the facts of life. We're coming back to that in a moment. In a statement dated the 12th of November last year, she said, "I asked the National Audit Office to carry out this work after looking at case after case of contract failure." This is the Ministry of Justice. Contract failure. In each case, we found, look at it, poor service. Poor service. So the contractor isn't doing what it's told. Poor value for money. We're paying for stuff we're not getting. And as a taxpayer, I object to that. And then government departments, Ministry of Justice, completely out of their depth. Why? Because they are institutionally thick. The Justice Select Committee, which is a separate parliamentary committee, has held further hearings and demanded a parliamentary debate in June 2013, last summer. I was able to attend and witnessed speaker after speaker, big names in our political life as well, people like Alan Johnson, former cabinet minister, the Shadow Minister of Justice, Andy Slaughter, and several others, Alan Beath, a very, very important man in government. 7 or 8 of them in total stood up and pulled the framework agreement to pieces. Unusually, very unusually, there was not a single speaker in its support, except the then minister, Helen Grant, who, guess what, shortly afterwards got sacked. All she was able to do was repeat the vagaries, the half-truths, and mendacity, long word, it means the lies of her civil servants. Her speech didn't take long and was greeted with laughter and derision by everybody present, not just us interpreters who were filling the public gallery, but by the other speakers, other MPs. Andy Slaughter, Shadow Minister of Justice, later went on to say, "It is time to drop the half-baked privatisation and outsourcing going on at the Ministry of Justice under the present Secretary of State, Grayling." Now, in researching the measures taken by the UK in respect of transposition, I went to several sources, including Eurolex, and I found a lot of lines on that. So I thought I'd start at the top and work my way down. Oh my God, is he joking? Yes, he is. I shan't be analysing them all. I'm going to concentrate on one. PACE. You may not know what PACE is. It's the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. Why is this important? Well, I was able to assist with one of those measures of transposition since I was involved in it. In fact, I wrote the suggested amendments for the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. This, I think, has been mistranslated in the previous list as the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act, but I took it off Eurolex. In summer 2013, as part of the transposition process, the Home Office issued a consultation for stakeholders regarding proposed changes, and specifically the Notes for Guidance 13A, and it's there. I'm not going to read it out to you because it takes too long. But with input with others, I drafted arguments where we stated, among other things, that we were very concerned to see the inclusion of the Ministry of Justice Framework Agreement as an example of services provided that satisfy the requirements of the directive. I'm not going to go through the directive either, but believe me, when I say that I've got an annotated version here that I've been annotating steadily over the last 4 years or so, 5 years, and we breach every single one of them in the United Kingdom. Some of them very badly, and they are going to rebound on our legal system very powerfully. We explained that failure to achieve the required standards results in many unwanted outcomes, from costly delays to the miscarriages of justice. We said the reputation of British justice would be seriously tarnished. Initially, they agreed. But on the 21st of October, we were notified that the final amendment meant that the Home Office had decided to ignore everything they had been told. And this is what they said in a phone call to our PR firm. "The ministers make the final decision, and we didn't think it would look right if the Home Office went against the Ministry of Justice. Idiots." However, no battle is ever fully lost. We've been very successful in persuading a number of police constabularies that it was in their best interest not to sign up to the framework agreement, and the Association of Chief Police Officers, ACPO for short, dropped its support for it entirely. And then we read in the published accounts of the contractor for 2012, where they reveal losses of £15 million, that the contractor states that the contract is what's called onerous. What does that mean, onerous? It's a technical word. It means they'll never make any money out of it. Good. More recent anecdotal news is that substantial numbers of linguists are abandoning working for the contractor, which is resorting to subcontracting assignments to smaller local agencies. Payments to interpreters are also reduced, and that ensures that the quality of service delivery is also reduced. The contractor still can say, however, that the job has been filled, which makes their statistics look good. But be in no doubt, this contract has been a failure for everybody. It is a catastrophic failure for the United Kingdom's global reputation for delivering justice. It's a failure for the client, the Ministry of Justice, at many levels. It's a failure for the contractor, who is making a loss. It is a failure for the linguists they employ, who are unable to make a living, and it's a failure for defendants, witnesses, and victims, because access to justice has been removed from them. Now, it would be very easy to walk away from all of this, to retire. Anybody think I really retired? No. You just move into... It's like Gandalf. You know when Gandalf dies in the first book? Well, he comes back to life and he's stronger, and that's a bit how I feel now. You do know what I'm talking about. Oh, we've got some Tolkien hounds here. That's excellent. The APCI, of which I used to be chairman, and now I'm just an ordinary member, of course, will not walk away. Justice is too important, so we continue to engage with the issues. How? Well, We continue to have a sort of dialogue with the Ministry of Justice. Let me tell you an amusing little story. I don't know how well I'm doing for time, but I timed this at 20 minutes, so I've got a few moments perhaps. In an early meeting we had with the Ministry of Justice shortly after Margaret Hodges' statement, we sat down with the top guy, the guy who runs the interpreting project in the ministry, a guy called Sean Palmer. He's now been moved on, incidentally. Why? Because he's useless. And I looked at him. I was on the opposite him on the table, so I was about the same distance as from you. And there was people all around the table. I said, Sean, he looked up. I said, you may recall that Margaret Hodge declared the Ministry of Justice an unintelligent customer. Has anything happened since then to change it? So you're still an unintelligent customer. That was fun. These people really actually don't know how to engage with professionals. They are hopeless. Now, part of the engagement with them is that after a year of delay, the ministry commissioned an independent assessment as to the quality of delivery under the framework, as demanded by Parliament in January 2013. So it took them a year to get their act together. The original date for publication, the target date, was the end of December a year ago. The date was then put back to March 2014, and then on the 3rd of October, which was my birthday, great birthday present this, I and other representatives met with the ministry to discuss a draft. As you can see, it's confidential. Until it's published to Parliament, I can't say anything about it. But everything we have said in millions of words, witness statements, in hearings with parliamentary bodies, in private meetings with MPs, every document we have produced, every word we have said, every single thing we have done, in that report is vindicated. I've learnt something very interesting. This is not part of my presentation, but I've learnt something, well, several things actually. One of the things I've learnt is this. When you're dealing with government, with a ministry, don't be nice. Don't be nasty either. Just have the facts and use the facts like a boxer uses his fists and hit, hit, hit. We constantly run press releases. It's the press releases that get you on the TV and in the radio. Why? Because the journalists want to talk to you. Oh my goodness me, somebody is actually speaking up, and they come and they talk to you, and will you go on TV? Yeah, TV? You bet, matey. I mean, the first appearance I had on TV was BBC. BBC. And the headline on the webpage was, "Agency steals data." Whoa. Capita's solicitors went mad. They tried to get it pulled and failed completely. We're totally sure, said the BBC, of our ground. They had the documentation from the agency itself saying what they'd done. They had not a leg to stand. It was great to go on TV and call them thieves. So let's move on from that. Next time I speak to you, goodness knows where it'll be or when, but I might have some news on that, because I suspect when I get back from here, it will have been delivered to Parliament. In the spring of 2014, Crown Commercial Services, CCS, published advance notice of a new framework agreement. Now, CCS reports to the Cabinet Office. Guess what? The Cabinet Office is superior in the hierarchy to a ministry, even an enormous ministry like the Ministry of Justice. The Cabinet Secretary, whose name is Francis Maud, very formidable man, what he says goes. Now, the Executive Director of the National Register of Public Service Interpreters, hopefully you've heard of the NRPSI, and I were invited to a Suppliers' Day organised by CCS. I sound that very glib when I say that. I sound very glib, but actually I bullied my way into the Suppliers' Day meeting. I rang him up, and we had a meeting in December last year, and as a consequence we kept in touch. The guy in charge is a chap called Brian Braid. We kept in touch, and then I was invited, I bullied my way, as I say, into the Suppliers' Day, and I bullied also of an invitation for Stephen Bishop from the National Register to go, and he went along too. Now, the situation with this new framework agreement is still fluid. They're about to issue, if they haven't already, and I haven't heard, so I guess it's still to come out, the invitation to tender. And that's going to be interesting. But membership organisations and our independent regulator, the National Register, are at least involved in the procedure now. There's many issues still to be thought through, but at least we're involved to a point, even though there's not yet been any proper consultation. There are one or two items of encouraging news, though. Firstly, the current framework ends on the 18th of August next year. I shan't forget that day because it's my wife's birthday. There are indications that the ministry will not be going down the route of a single monopoly supplier again. And they may even look at joining the CCS framework. I'm not scared of a framework agreement. What I'm scared of is interpreters, professionals, not being treated with respect and not being paid properly, or at all. They've told us they're keeping a close eye on it, and if it succeeds, they may be open to persuasion. So you can see that it is in all of our interests to make great efforts to ensure the CCS project succeeds. Then we move on to Qualitas. I dare say you all know what I'm talking about. The Qualitas project has produced a helpful summary of the current situation, which mentions the National Register in some detail, and it specifies at least one recognised qualification to practice in the LIT field. However, it describes the nosedive in the quality of service provision to the courts, a position reinforced by the 3 volumes of the Dossier of Failures, or Dossier of Shame, as I call it, which is updated periodically, and we publish it periodically for people like the parliamentary committees, MPs, journalists. We distribute it to hundreds of people when it comes out, and it details capita failures. It also says how much money has been wasted by these failures. In December last year, we worked it out to be about £17 million. When I met with Brian Braid, this is extra cost, you know, people being held in prison when they shouldn't have been, a day's cost of court being lost because the interpreter didn't turn up, and that sort of thing. I mentioned it to Brian Braid, and he said, yeah, we reckon about 18 million. Really? We say 17. So we're pretty jolly close. The government says, oh, we've saved about 12 million. No, you haven't. You've lost 8. Now, it was recently disclosed in the latest quarterly report from the Ministry of Justice the number of complaints over a 12-month period against the contractor. During that period, there were 50 complaints against interpreters working or contracted to the members of the National Register. 50. Over that same period, complaints made against the framework contractor amounted to 12,300. You have to ask, if you had the choice between capita translation and interpreting and the National Register for a supply of interpreters, which would you prefer? In conclusion, she's been waiting for those words. So have you. In conclusion, we find ourselves in a bit of a strange position. On the one hand, the Ministry of Justice claims it's compliant with the directive. On the other hand, we've got a continuous and depressing record of failure. Massive ancillary cost. Thousands of complaints. And the vast majority of public service interpreters continue to boycott the framework. So something is clearly badly wrong. Well, my view is that future directives could tighten up in a few areas which might assist. For example, why is the expression interpreter not defined? We have a mantra. There's 4 things to be an interpreter. I won't bore with them now. I've got other things to say. But if you want to know what they are, come and see me. 4 things. Secondly, it is to be hoped that others will learn from the Ministry of Justice Framework Agreement catastrophe. We call it the MOJ FWA. I think of it as a dragon called the Mojfwa. Mojfwa. Slay death to the Mojfwa. You'll see it on Twitter if you follow me on Twitter. So, how do you learn? 1, consult the experts. Who are the experts? Stick your hand up. Stick your hand up. Stick it up. Stick it up. You're not sticking your hand up. Put your hand up. Put your hand up. You are an expert. Now, you're not all going to go to your Ministry of Justice, but you're going to go to your chairman. It may be Dimitra, it may be somebody else. Maybe you're not a member of PEEMPIP, you're a member of something else. But your representative must elbow their way to the table. Consult the experts. That means the practitioners through their membership organisations. They must listen to what they have to say and consult external experts too. Who am I talking about? Ulita, for example. Tremendous help to us. Ignored totally, of course, by our Ministry of Justice. But if you listen to the experts and follow their advice, you'll save money and you won't look such an idiot. 2, outsourcing does not save money. It wastes money, and its allure is superficial. I describe it as a means of shoveling state money, public money, your money, into private pockets. That's what it's all about. It's political. 3, establish an independent regulator. If you haven't got one in your country, and I don't know which countries are represented here, I'm sure there's more than 1 or 2. If you haven't got an independent regulator, a register, get one. Sort it out. Something like the UK's flagship national register. Only an independent regulator will preserve standards. If you expect a commercial agency to prefer keeping standards up or keeping profits up, which do you think they're going to choose? They won't give us stuff about standards. All LITs must have a recognised professional qualification. If you go to court and you're not qualified to be there, keep out. That's what I say, and that's what any professional should say. My final comment, which isn't up there, is this. Make the ministry fear you. Not be scared of you, fear you, because the consequences of not listening to you are far worse than listening to you and taking note of what you say. And thank you very much indeed for listening.